Welcome to Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, PR, and authentic storytelling. I'm your host, Lisa Buffo. You can find me on Instagram at LeeBuff and on Twitter at LeeBuff21, and I'm the founder and CEO of Cannabis Marketing Association. Today's conversation features Kristi Price. Kristi is the founder of KRMA Media, the premier publisher of B2B content for Black professionals in cannabis, and the editor-in-chief of CannaBusiness magazine, a professional website and digital publication. Kristi is also a journalist, producer, and host of the Black Fridays podcast and Inclusion Conversations, a series of interviews with mainstream cannabis leaders that dive into their commitment to DEI and business in the cannabis industry. A proud HBCU graduate of Southern University and A&M College, she is certified in change and project management and has spent her career as a business management consultant focused on marketing communications. Previously, Kristi served as the principal leadership advisor to brands like Nike, Red Bull, Diageo Guinness USA, Philip Morris, Kimberly-Clark, Chevron, and other global business organizations. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, PR, and authentic storytelling. And today we have Kristi Price, who's the founder and CEO of KRMA Media, the parent company of CannaBusiness magazine. Kristi, thank you so much for being here today. We're really excited to talk with you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for having me. I am excited to be here and appreciate your time today.
Yes, of course. So first, let's tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Tell us about Kristi, KRMA Media, CannaBusiness magazine. Who are you and what are you working on these days?
Well, okay. So, like you mentioned, my name is Kristi Price, and I am the founder of KRMA Media. KRMA Media Inc. Is a publishing organization that focuses on publishing business-to-business content for Black cannabis professionals and owners and entrepreneurs that are doing business in the industry. And so for me, getting started with KRMA or launching KRMA a couple of years ago really was like a compilation of all of the work that I've done in my career thus far. And so so I went to school for mass communications and broadcast journalism. And so like messaging and communication has always been a passion of mine. So I've always been really excited about talking to people, educating people, and just kind of getting the word out about things. And so then after college, I just so happened to kind of get started in a career that was very, very similar to cannabis in that it was in another formerly prohibited industry. So after college, I spent a lot of time in marketing and comms for the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry. I was in even the energy drink industry for a while. And so, when you've worked in those spaces, like the nuances of doing work, particularly marketing and communications in those types of industries where they're highly regulated and they're very limited, and you have to come up with really unique ways of getting, your brand and your message out there, that challenge really inspired me throughout that part of my career. And so it just made sense for me when I started to think about the cannabis industry and how I wanted to get involved and add value, that I took, all of that I learned in those other industries that are very similar to cannabis in that way, and create, some sort of organization that would help my community be more successful in the space. And that's kind of how the long way around to getting to how I founded KRMA and how Black CannaBusiness came into fruition.
And remind me what year you founded KRMA and where you're located.
So I'm in Texas. I'm in Houston. And I founded KRMA in 2019, February of 2019. And that was after, years of traveling around the country and, doing research and going to conferences and really trying to figure out exactly where the industry was and what their needs or the gaps were. And because, I spent so much time just really trying to determine like what I wanted to do. I didn't just want to get into the industry to say I was in it. Like I really wanted to add value. So, spending that time to research and take my time and really figure out the lane I wanted to enter the space in, has really paid off dividends because we've really had a lot of support. There's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about the work that we're doing with the Black Cannabis brand, and so I'm just really excited about the work that we're doing.
Awesome. Yeah, so Black CannaBusiness Magazine, it's an online publication that
Hmm.
cultivates authentic relationships amongst Black owners and customers in the legal cannabis space, that actively supports the growth of Black cannabis business owners through education, outreach, and business partnerships. So I want to know, how do you define authentic relationships and how can they be cultivated? And I will add that
Hmm.
part of our mission at Cannabis Marketing Association is to bring a positive perception to and authentic understanding of
Hmm.
cannabis and its consumers.
Hmm.
So we also agree and have authenticity as one of our core values and believe it's core in marketing particularly. So
Right.
what's your take on authentic relationships?
You know, it's it is it's kind of, I have a couple of takes on it. I think, the first take, and it's really, again, comes from the work that I did in alcohol and tobacco. Those industries were probably some of the first industries that really, and I guess because they had to and they were forced into, but their target marketing, like their way that they are able to identify their consumers and talk to them in their authentic voice, is just, I mean, they were years ahead of a lot of industries in that regard. And in a lot of way, and the reason that is because of the limitation that they had and how they communicated. So they had to figure out where their people were, and they had to go there, and they had to show themselves there, and they had to introduce themselves and allow these communities to get familiar and comfortable with them, and then build that trust. And so I think it's no different when we're thinking about it, in this industry, whether it's from a marketing, perspective only, or if it's also when we're thinking about like social responsibility. And so for me, and what we're doing with Black Canada Business is really helping our allies understand that, one of the first things you can do to show your commitment to inclusion or diversity in this industry is to take Black businesses seriously. And if you take them seriously, then that means that on your marketing budget, you have allocated, dollars or time or efforts that are going towards your diversity marketing efforts. I mean, just like you would for women or a particular state or region of the country, you have to think about, Black business owners as a separate community almost, because we, in a lot of ways, we are, in that we have different challenges, but we also have a lot of opportunity. And oftentimes, our allies are those who can come alongside us and help, us get there quicker. A lot of times, those partnerships, and that's one of the things we talk about with Black Cannabis Business. It is, yes, we are founded for and in support of, Black cannabis business professionals, other underrepresented groups, also our allies. Like I say all the time, we have about 12,000 subscribers, I think, right now for our weekly newsletter. And it's as diverse, as we imagine the industry could be. I mean, of course, even with our Black Cannabis brand, I think that what resonates across the industry is that we are here to help kind of create like this pipeline, for more Black businesses to get into the industry, and for more mainstream organizations who truly want to have an impact on inclusion to support our efforts in making that happen. So we're in a really good space, a really good position, I think.
Yeah, and that's incredible growth. 12,000 subscribers in two or so years.
Yeah,
So
it's
congratulations on that.
thank you. We don't talk enough about that, but we're planning on, celebrating that a little bit more this year as we kind of come out of, the COVID and everything that kind of, because 2020 was really supposed to be the year that we just really launched, but things changed. And of course, I'm in Houston, so and that was the home of George Floyd, and so there was just a lot that was going on last year, that we just had to take a beat and be engaged about and with, But coming out of that, now we're looking at 2021 with a lot more clarity. Like, we know where we're going, we know what we're hoping to accomplish, and so this is like, our launch 2.0. So we're still kind of gearing up to get to that point where we can really introduce the brand in a bigger way. to the industry.
Yes, I totally understand and relate to that. Last year was definitely a reset for
Yeah.
many. So,
Yeah.
so I would like to talk a bit about media and the role it plays. So,
Okay.
how can media play an effective role of storytelling within cannabis, and particularly underrepresented founders and business owners who may not have, the budgets to reach
Mm-hmm.
those big PR agencies, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
working with a bootstrap team and bootstrap resources? How can they leverage media to get their stories out there?
Well, social media has really changed the game, I think, in a lot of ways uh, for both sides, for the media and for those who are trying to get media attention. I think one of the things that's really helpful about social is the proof. So if by the time something goes viral now, that social proof that that's an interesting concept, angle, story, that really resonates with people. And so I think with anything that if we're, from a media or marketing or any perspective, when we're trying to think about a new way or a different way of doing things, I always recommend that we just find something or find an example of, even if it's not exactly what you're thinking about, but you have to have a starting point from which you can kind of evolve your strategy into. Like, a lot of people will see a story that they like, they'll go through all the comments. Typically people will share stories or similar stories or whatever. So a lot of it, with media, and as it is with journalism, is just doing the research and spending some time figuring out how to make, again, going back to the authenticity part, have authentic connections, with people, and think about, how people are going to receive introduction. So, if you're coming from a big agency versus the brand itself, or, from, the some rep, or the founder itself, so I think all of that goes into kind of that thought process about how you want to show up in the media, and how you can control it better, when you kind of do your research, and figure out maybe some of the channels you want to start with, so that you can kind of have more control over the message that you're putting out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what are some effective ways that you see brands using marketing and communications in general? And I am particularly interested, since you mentioned it, lessons learned from
Hmm.
alcohol and tobacco, if that resonates with you. You had mentioned that they
Hmm.
really by force had to find a way to
Hmm.
connect
Hmm.
authentically with their customers. And
Right.
as we know, cannabis marketing regulations follow that of alcohol. So what are
Hmm.
some lessons as far as effective ways brands
Hmm.
can use marketing and communications, and if
Hmm.
so, any lessons learned from those industries?
Oh yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think if you're in marketing or if you're in communications, and we all understand personas, or we all understand audience analysis, like we know the importance of understanding who we are marketing to, who we're communicating to. So we're just going to leave that as, that's just, we take that for granted. I'm taking for granted we all understand that. So once we've identified our audiences, then the next thing to do, if you haven't already, is to actually put a real person. So now you take the persona and you put it on somebody. So if your goal is, you're marketing to Black business owners, then you should probably talk to some Black business owners. It's same. One of the things that was a big deal in these other industries, and they invested so much money in focus groups, was for this, because they had so many dollars that they could allocate, to marketing and communications efforts. So they needed to make sure they're getting the biggest bang for their buck. And so instead of sending out messaging to people that it wouldn't resonate with, they decided that they would test it. So I think one of the key learnings that all of us as communicators should be really start to get more comfortable with is, testing our messages. And that's as simple. And if you're a marketer, I'm assuming that maybe you've done email marketing, and they have A/B and split testing and that kind of stuff. All that is, legitimate. I mean, if there's a reason why, experts suggest that you do that. And that's the same thing, with us, whether it's email or written communication, or marketing, interactive communications. It's still about how we are communicating to people, meeting them where they are, and speaking to them in ways that they are going to receive it. And then also, and we keep talking about the authenticity part, doing your research and understanding this group and the people in these communities, um, what their challenges are, what their successes have been, because again, that I think all of that kind of feeds into your voice and how you talk to them and how you communicate and interact with them.
Yeah, and I think you've made a good point about A/B testing and also
Hmm.
doing it early. I think
Yeah.
sometimes founders in this space. I mean, I talk with founders who are former marketers every day,
Right.
or
Yeah.
former full-time marketers, and then they become entrepreneurs. And it's never too early to start testing. Even if
Yeah.
you have 10 people on your email list, start
Yes.
doing that so you can have that data, so that moving
Hmm.
forward you're making these informed decisions. And I imagine that's what helped you scale so quickly to those 12,000 subscribers, is by
Yeah.
doing that testing and keeping that focus on those analytics and knowing your audience early on.
Yeah. And I mean, and to be honest with you, it was really, you're right. I think, and test early and often, different campaigns, you're trying different things. I'm constantly thinking about ways to improve. And I think that's important, with communication, because in any relationship, with the longer you know somebody, the better your communication gets, and the more, and if you're really developing this relationship, you're not just communicating for the sake of it, but you're really getting to know people. That's, I think, one of the things that was really instrumental in our list growing as quickly as it did, is because people liked us and they wanted to tell other people about us, and then it just went, and it kind of grew, and it grows from there. So I think it's the same thing with what we're doing. And you were right, it doesn't matter how many you start with, because if you can figure out early what resonates with your people, like what gets them to move, what makes them feel like they're a part of what you're doing, it's worth taking your time to figure that out than having a whole lot of people on the list, or just sitting there not doing anything but just on the list.
Right, semi-engaged, and that
Yeah.
makes it difficult if you're selling media as well, because you
Hmm.
can say, oh, I've got this list, but if your readership's not engaged,
Yeah.
what good does that do?
What's the point? Right.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So what ways do you believe that online marketing will continue to grow, particularly in relation to the cannabis industry? And I think we've seen in online media and the role that it plays in marketing. And I think we've seen a focus that was happening, but the pandemic accelerated, where
Hmm.
all of a sudden last year, all the budgets we were putting towards these in-person events,
Yeah.
folks are trying to find ways to connect using online media. What's
Hmm.
the advantage of it, and how do publications like Black CannaBusiness Magazine fit in?
In the online media space is what we're saying.
Yeah, and
The
how you
question.
see that playing a role for the cannabis industry moving forward.
So it was funny because I had a call earlier this morning, and one of the things that she and I were talking about was just how siloed this industry is, and it's because of because of the way we're set up. We're not federally legal, and so many things are state specific, region specific, et cetera, et cetera. I think, like you mentioned, I think last year was an for marketers anyway. It was really eye opening, in that the response to virtual meeting, and online engagement just really was the highest it's ever been, I think, across industry, not just cannabis, but just period, online media period. And I think that, for cannabis in particularly, it probably, came to us at the right time, because I believe that
Yeah.
there was no better there's no better way of really getting a bird's eye view of what's going on in the industry than to be able to be in Texas, and hop on a conference that's happening in the Mid Atlantic, or to be in or Portland and be able to find out what's going on, in the DMV, just by being online. So in terms of engagement, I don't think we're ever going to be the same. I think there will always be hybrid. I think there will always be virtual options. I just believe it is going to be the way, kind of like curbside. I don't think is ever going to go away.
Yeah.
The pandemic really forced some things, but some of those things really work. Even outside of a pandemic. So I think the future is bright for online media because again, thinking back to being, in a highly regulated industry, there's definitely an opportunity for platforms to really take advantage of those limitations, and particularly in the cannabis space.
Yeah, and I think it also brought certainly for us a sense of
Hmm.
community together,
Hmm.
where
For sure.
we have members in California who are dealing with the marketing nuances there, but then we've also
Hmm.
got members in the Northeast and the Mid
Hmm.
Atlantic who it might seem very different, but
Yeah,
it's actually not what
it's
everyone's
really
going
not.
through in cannabis, even though we're siloed by these state borders, so to speak.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that opportunity for bringing the community together too
Hmm.
has been really awesome, and
I
I'm
think,
excited to
yeah.
see how that now plays out in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always, when because we had our conference last year, our little virtual conference last year, and that was a feedback that we got coming out of it. It was like, wow, I didn't ever knew it was so many people here, or people were doing this there. Like sometimes people forget that they're not alone. They feel like in this industry, depending on where you live, in the community you're from, how or evolved your family may be to this industry. It can be lonely if you don't have, a tribe or people that you can really identify with, and people that can identify with you. And it's the same thing in tobacco and in the liquor industries. They're vices for a lot of people, or the vice industries. And though they're fun and exciting, I mean, they're relatively speaking, they're huge organizations, but it's not a whole lot of folks who work in that space, in that capacity. So having the opportunity to see each other and be together and talk about best practices, and just have someone that you can just start a text group with, whatever it is that you do. um the community is important, and I know that for us anyway, Black CannaBusiness, online media has certainly helped us to connect, and expand our community, the way that we have played a big role.
Definitely, definitely. And I'm curious
Hmm.
if there's any lessons learned you would like to share since founding Karma Media and your magazine. What would be, I wish
Hmm.
I knew this when I started. We have a lot of listeners
Hmm.
who are early in stages as far as starting their companies. What's something you wish you
Hmm.
knew about the journey, whether it's in cannabis or marketing or just anything you've kind of learned along the way?
Well, so I don't know if this is something that I learned that specifically with Karma, but I know that I was able to kind of draw on some of the lessons learned I've learned throughout my life as a marketer. That's really paid dividends for me with Karma, and that was. Um, so I'm certified in project management and change management also, and so I'm a big proponent of planning, and not just and not in your head, but just really putting it on paper, um, having people hold you accountable, for different deliverables. I think all of us in marketing wear so many different hats, and the lesson that I learned is the thing that I like to do the least, I start with. And then I do the fun stuff after I've done the stuff, that I don't like to do. And what I don't like to do is like numbers and kind of thinking through, that part is always a challenge for me. So that's kind of what I start first with: dates, deadlines, benchmarks, things like that. And so for me, one of the things that I feel like has helped me, that has always helped me, was just my planning my projects and just really putting pen to paper, and I'm coming up with plans that I could really that are really that we can really implement and really get done.
That's a good point. And I think it is often overlooked when in the world of immediate rewards and fast
Mm-hmm.
ROI, to be able to plan and take that long-term view
Yeah.
does save you time and
Yeah.
money and pays
Yeah. It
off
really
in the end.
does. You would waste so much money if you are working from the beginning. You start with the end in mind, and then you kind of work backwards. Because if it, we can talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but you will waste so much money on branding or develop your design, because that's the fun stuff. Everybody wants to get out and get their website and do all the fun things, but those oftentimes are sometimes the most expensive things, and so just having a really solid plan of action uh, is important. Very, very, very important. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Great. Then work backwards. How do we get there? Starting from where we are today. So that's kind of the thing that I believe is most helpful for
That's
newcomers.
yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, awesome. So, is there any advice that you received at the beginning of your career that sticks with you to this day? I know we sort of just talked on that, but anything else you would add a little bit?
Well, I will say this, and I don't know if this is unique to Black Cannabis and our brand, or if it's something that would resonate with others. But I once had another publisher, and I won't mention any names, but another publisher, a big one. She and I had a conversation, and I asked her for that advice. I said, "What if there's anything you could tell me right now? What would it be?" And she told me to find my lane and to stay in it. Like, stay in your lane. And her take on that was because I was a Black business and I was coming into the cannabis industry, and the social equity, social justice conversation is really almost overpowering at a lot of times, because it's so much conversation about it. But on the other side of social equity and social justice, there are legitimate, like, business challenges and opportunities that exist for Black people in this space. So whereas, yes, we're focusing on social justice and that conversation needs to happen, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's also an opportunity to support businesses who may not be equity applicants, but that are still Black business owners in the space, who are still adding, to our inclusion efforts, who need, serious consideration. And so that was the advice, and she was right, because, you know, as a Black professional in this space, that is a lot of times the first thing people think about is social equity or social justice, or what is Black Canada. They're like, well, what's Black Canada business? Is it for, are you a nonprofit? I get that a lot. So that was that, and I think that's for, if you're a woman-owned business or whatever. Just if you are a woman-owned business, but you are an architect and you build dispensaries, you lead with the fact that you are an architect, and then you build dispensaries, and so then you go after those services that help you be, the best architect you can be. And it's the same thing with Black business. We don't lead with equity because all of us, one, are not equity, and I think, again, that conversation is for another time. But as just, we're business owners like anybody else, like everyone else, and so we are in needs of the same products and services that any other business would have. And so, understanding that early on, and knowing that that's my lane, and I got to stay in this lane. And even though people want to put me in another one, I have to figure out a way to constantly almost bring people back to my lane. So that is uber important. People project a lot when you're a new business. You'll come in and you'll give someone your concept or your elevated pitch, and they'll say, what did you think about this? And did you think, so it's one of those things where you really almost have to go through your email and delete all of those subscriptions that you subscribe to that have all these different ideas and voices, and only kind of be laser focused on what you're here to do. It seems extreme, but I'm telling you, all of that extra stuff just takes up a whole lot of space. Find your lane, and then make sure that you are equipping yourself, with those things that you need to stay, like those your guidelines. Like, where are you? Like you mentioned a minute ago, about authenticity being like one of your pillars for, CMA. It's the same thing. Like, if you're a brand, what are the four promises? Like, what are your parameters? And stay within those.
I love the four promises reference. That's great. Instead of
Yeah.
just brand pillars.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank
Yeah.
you for that. I think that's a really good point about staying in your lane and knowing what it is. Because I think
Mm-hmm.
founders can tend to get these big, we're visionaries by design. So we've got these big
Mm-hmm.
ideas about our companies and where they can go. And sometimes we're living 10, 15 years in the future, but it's,
Yeah.
there's a path to get there. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a very exciting industry. There's a lot of different things we can do and accomplish, but yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's really, really well noted and well taken.
Good, because I'll talk and
So
I go on, and sometimes I talk in circles. I hope I get I hope I get it out when I'm trying to communicate. But
no, I hear you. I hear you. And we deal with it too. We're
yeah,
a Cannabis Marketing Association and we know what that means. But to
yeah,
everyone who engages with us and our members, they might see a different way in which we can
hmm,
help them. And
yeah,
so we're constantly fighting scope creep with our
yeah,
services and how we help
yeah,
and engage the community. And
right,
sometimes that means we're not a fit for
hmm,
everyone. And that can be tough when you're
hmm,
focused on revenue and you're focused on growing. But it
yeah.
does serve in the long term.
It really does. It really does.
Awesome. So I'm curious, Kristi, what are you most hopeful for in regards to the future of cannabis? And what's your favorite part of this industry or this space?
I'm most hopeful for. Okay, so when I founded Karma in 2019, at that time, statistics showed that there were Black participation in the industry was at 4%. Now, for those of us who took statistics, I hated statistics in school, but what we know is there's always a margin of error. And if you think about that margin of error, I mean, error, you could basically say they're like very few, like 1% probably at the time. So going back to promises, I have to quantify the things that we do so that when I'm talking to people about my lane, I can own it and say, this is how, I'm impacting my lane. This is what I'm doing. And so one of our promises is to be a pipeline, for more participation for Black people, underrepresented groups in this space. So what I'm most hopeful for is for us to double the number. So on a lot of our materials that we share with our partners, we talk about 8%. And that's our goal. So my what I'm looking forward to is by CannaBusiness and all of the things that we're doing with our allies and our partners, that we are able to over the next decade double the number of participation that we saw when we found it. So that's that 8%. So I'm looking very forward to that. And what was the second part of the question?
Your favorite part about the cannabis industry?
My favorite part. Oh, I have I have so many favorite parts. So, and again, my background is in vice industries. There is a certain nuance to doing business with people who work on premise or in bars or at parties or do events. I mean, it's just a really, really fun industry to be in, and I am excited to be back. I took a break between marketing and brand communications and stuff in these industries, and then I kind of took a turn and started doing more management consulting, blah blah blah. So I'm super excited to be back because I thought that there was nowhere else to lend those talents, and to have this new opportunity to do it in a new and emerging industry. It's just the perfect fit for me. And so I'm really excited to be contributing and doing my part to create a more welcoming and inclusive industry.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's great. You're in Texas too. So the fact that
Yeah.
you're, Texas, we get to see Texas come online at some point
Uh-huh.
soon. So you get to watch that as well
Yeah.
on the ground evolve, which being not from Colorado, but living in Colorado during
Yeah.
that process was really, really exciting
Yeah, yeah. So we're
as
waiting.
well.
We're doing. There's a lot of work going on here, on the ground, and it's not just really Texas. We're really connected to the Gulf Coast area and the Gulf Coast region as well. So they're particularly for Black business owners. It's a huge, huge, huge opportunity. It's going on in Alabama,
Yeah.
Louisiana. They're more progressive in a lot of ways than Texas is. But again, it's a really exciting for people of color color who are in the South, because it's really opening up opportunities for generational wealth in those areas where land is in abundance and farming and agriculture is still um, um, a big part of the community there. So it'd be awesome to be able to integrate all of what they've been doing down there for all these years into an industry that could really use, some homegrown support.
Definitely. And so you're going to be speaking at our upcoming Cannabis Marketing Summit, which is June 8th through
Yes.
10th. And speaking of, it's an online virtual event. So wherever you're listening from, you can join. And you're going to be hosting a workshop with
Hmm.
Ernest Tony and Rue Johnson, both
Right.
visionaries who I have deep respect for, about infusing your cannabis B2B marketing with diversity. Could
Hmm.
you talk a little bit about how you got to that topic and give a little sneak peek of what you're going to be discussing?
Absolutely. So I actually was on LinkedIn, and I can't remember exactly what the catalyst was for me to write this article, but really the title of this workshop is based on an article that I published on LinkedIn, like really the only one. Shame on me. I need to publish a little bit more. That's one of my things on my things to do list, you guys. But that article really started or kicked off a lot of very interesting conversations that I had with a lot of our partners and allies and sponsors, because it just kind of talked about some tips that you can take or consider if you're an organization who's decided that they really want to take inclusion seriously and they want to leverage marketing to do that. I think every organization is different. For me, and when I talk to my clients, it's always about, but this is the most cost effective way. And it's the way that you can really have a lot of control over your messaging. So if you say it, um, one of the things, or one of the tips we've already talked about, Lisa, and it was the authenticity part. That's one of those tips. So it's definitely about knowing who your community, or knowing who your group that you're targeting is, and getting to know their language, where they hang out. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like marketing 101. This community, this group, or whether it's Black professionals or women or Hispanic or Indigenous, BIPOC, whatever it is, taking the time as an organization to understand where they're coming from and who they are, um, and where they are. So that's a big one. And being able to tell it back to them, being able to go to them with, understanding that, um, kind of like why you're there, and what's going on. So that authenticity is a really a big part. Another thing to consider, that we talk a lot about, and we will talk a little bit about during the workshop, is how to craft those challenging conversations. I think when I started Black CannaBusiness, and there were mainstream organizations, white owned organizations, who were trying to figure out how to, get to know us. They even would say, like in the email, they'd say, Kristi, I know this is going to sound awkward or crazy, or I don't know how to start. I mean, even starting the conversation is harder for people than I think we all realize. So we're going to talk about, having those uncomfortable conversations, and kind of giving, the folks who are in the session with us kind of a preview of what to expect. If you're wanting to partner with a Black organization that really, and that it inspires you. If you want to support Black businesses, there are definitely better resources than others. So we'll certainly share where people can go, to really legitimize folks in the space, and the people who are doing the work in the space. So it's so, I mean, I can go on and talk about it. So many different things that we're going to talk about, but we're definitely going to have the authenticity talk, and talk about how to find, your target audiences, and how to connect with them there. And then, like I mentioned, we'll also talk about having those conversations. And once you find them, then what do you do? Like, then what are you going to say?
Yeah.
Right? What's the conversation going to be
Yeah.
about? You know? So, we also talk about, and I guess the last thing, and it's a tip, and it's something that we'll do during the workshop, is we'll talk through each organization's manifesto. Everyone should have a diversity manifesto, which is just a one pager, a poster, a screensaver, whatever it is for your organization, but it's just something where everyone knows they can go to and remember their lane and what they're here, to do in their own words. So, working with attendees to kind of craft the outline for that, and they can take it back to their organization, do their own manifesto, put it on their website. I mean, that's the other thing we talk about also is when you are an ally, you need to show your work. So if you're making these efforts, you need to make sure that whomever you're partnering with or working with, that your work is shown, and that you're recognized for your, and not to say that you're doing the work for recognition, but authenticity oftentimes is rooted in work that you've done. Like, show up, like, where are you, what are you doing? So if you're in California and you're wanting to market to people in the Gulf Coast, show what you've done in California. Like, show the work that you've done. That's part of the conversation. That's an icebreaker, for a lot of different relationships that you can build. So, it's great to support, but it's even better when you can show your support in other ways that would benefit your organization also.
Thank you for that. And I also love that you're taking this B2B angle, because I think these conversations are a lot of time had from the B2C, where it feels a bit transactional, or like, okay, once it's done, it's done, you've connected with that customer. But B2B it's a bit of a different game, and it's a longer term game, and it also involves your personal credibility and reputation.
Right.
So yeah, I'm just really glad that you're hosting this workshop and we're having this discussion. It's very timely, and I'm excited to hear what you, Ernest and Rue, have to say.
Well, we're excited. I was with them in Denver
Nice.
last week. And so, yeah, I think we're going to have fun, and we're definitely, you're going to have to do some work. So come prepared, people, to think and interact, because we can't do without hearing from the group. So it's going to be very engaging, very interactive. Both Rue and Ernest are so much fun, and their energy is so amazing. So I'm looking forward to the three of us getting together to present during the summit. I think we're going to have a good time.
Yes. And as a reminder, that's June 9th from 12 to 1 Mountain Time. So it's on the second day of the summit, and I believe it's that second session of the day as well. Okay, Kristi. Well, any parting words you have? Any pitches you want to make for Karma? Anyone you want to address directly before we sign off, or last words you want to say?
No one that I want to address. However, I will say this, that we are taking the Black Canna Conference to New Orleans this year, November 18th through the 20th. In person in the New Orleans Convention Center. Yay! So we're very excited. We are in the last, talking about that plan I talked about, right? So we're ending our blueprinting phase. So some of our allies and partners that we are already in connection with will probably be getting our more information on how they can participate, like in the next week or so. But starting in June is where we're going to really start to market and spread the word. We have state ambassadors who are going to help us. We have 10 target states that we're targeting. So we have a lot coming up, and I'm excited about that. And of course, all of my membership sisters and brothers will definitely be some of the first folks to hear about it. So I'm excited to share when we're ready, which is almost.
That's so exciting. New Orleans is the best. I'm so excited you're going to be there and at the convention center. And so how can our listeners connect with you? What's your website,
so LinkedIn,
social, any way they can reach out?
Right. So on LinkedIn, you can find me. I'm Kristi C. Price. Very easy. BlackCannaBusiness.com. You can always subscribe to our newsletter there. And I do a lot of emails too. So we have a weekly newsletter, but then sometimes I just send a note to everybody, just like, hey y'all, this is what's going on. So that's also a great way for us to keep in touch. And then we have our podcast every Friday. It's a Black Fridays podcast. And you can find that on our website as well. So if you go to blackcannabusiness.com and you click on the podcast button, you can kind of see some old, some past episodes that we have, and kind of learn more about the work that the Black cannabis business community is doing. I mean, we're doing a lot of amazing things, and so we kind of leverage the podcast to amplify those stories. So if you ever want to know how to get in touch with a Black cannabis business professional, listen to our podcast, because we have the best and the brightest on the show. So that's my plug for the podcast.
Awesome. Well, everyone who's listening, please be sure to connect with Kristi and check out her website. And if you'd like to hear more, join us at the Cannabis Marketing Summit. You can find all that information on our website, thecannabismarketingassociation.com. She will be speaking on day 2 on 7 tips for infusing your cannabis B2B marketing with diversity. And Kristi, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to have you today. And thank you for sharing all your insights and hard-earned lessons.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for having me. I can always talk. Okay. So this is never a big, I'm always open to this type of dialogue. Yeah. So, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to chit chat a little bit. And I look forward to seeing everybody at the summit.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Party Like a Marketer. Check us out on Instagram at Party Like a Marketer and at Canna Marketing and engage with us. We love to hear from you. And don't forget to join us at the 2nd annual Virtual Cannabis Marketing Summit this June 8th through 10th to learn, play, and network with cannabis communications professionals. Over 3 days, we'll be hosting 12 sessions, 3 panels, 3 workshops, and 3 networking events, including an exclusive members-only track for our CMA members focused on managing marketing teams. Tickets are on sale on our website, thecannabismarketingassociation.com, and early bird tickets are on sale, available through May 25th. And it's virtual, so wherever you are in the world, you can attend. Thank you so much, and I look forward with connecting with all of you on social media. You can find me, Lisa, at LeeBuff on Instagram and at LeeBuff21 on Twitter.